All right, let's dive right in. We're going to unpack a pretty provocative worldview from a popular streamer today. And believe me, it challenges some of the biggest beliefs we have about society. We're talking about a defensive police use of force, a sharp critique of modern activism, and, get this, an argument that questions the very foundation of democracy. It's a lot to get through.
So here's our game plan. First step, we're going to get into the legal nitty-gritty of a police shooting. Then we'll shift to some, let's call it blunt advice on how you should interact with the police. After that, the streamer's argument really zooms out to take on modern protests. And finally, we land on the most radical idea of all, the case against everyone having the right to vote.
Okay, so let's start with this controversial police shooting. The streamer's entire point here, the thing their whole argument rests on, is this single idea. What looks really bad to you and me watching at home is not necessarily the same thing as what's legally defensible in a courtroom. And that huge difference? Well, it all boils down to one very specific legal term.
And here it is, the core of the legal argument. Objectively reasonable. It's basically the law's way of saying you can't be a Monday morning quarterback. The streamer argues that the legal system doesn't care about what we think an officer could have done when we watch it back in slow motion 20 times. Nope, it's all about what a so-called reasonable officer would have done in that exact chaotic split-second moment.
And this really lays out the two completely different ways of looking at it, right? On one side, you've got what the streamer calls the hindsight trap. That's us, maybe on the couch saying, come on, why didn't the officer just jump out of the way? But the legal standard, the thing that actually matters in court, asks a totally different question. What was the threat the officer was facing right then and there? It's about the immediate situation, not the outcome. And this is where it all comes together. The streamer's main point is that the entire legal case pivots on that one moment, the second the vehicle lurches forward and makes contact. In the eyes of the law, they argue, that action isn't just a small thing. It instantly creates what's called a serious threat. And once that legal box is checked, well, that's when the use of deadly force becomes legally defensible. It's a game changer for the whole case.
So, okay, if that's the legal reality the streamer is laying out, then the next logical question is, what should you, as a civilian, actually do in one of these encounters? This is where the commentary shifts from high-level legal theory to some very, very practical, and let's just say, blunt advice for how to handle a traffic stop.
And the rules they endorse? Man, they are as simple as it gets. Number 1, obey the law. 2, stop the car immediately. 3, be polite. 4, keep your hands on the steering wheel. And then, the big one, well, you can read it. The whole idea here is just pure pragmatism. De-escalate, comply, and for your own good, just don't say anything that could dig you into a deeper hole.
Now, we're going to pivot. After talking about how individuals should act, the streamer's critique zooms way out to look at how groups act. Specifically, they take aim at what they see as the real motivations driving modern activism and public protests.
And wow, they do not pull any punches here. Their entire critique gets boiled down into this one incredibly provocative phrase, privilege causeplay. The argument is basically that a lot of modern protesting isn't really about creating actual real-world change. Instead, it's more of a performance, something activists do for themselves. So what do they actually mean by privilege cosplay? Well, this breaks it down. They argue that these protests often trivialize real tragedies, like the Holocaust, that they're used to launder bad ideas by wrapping them in the flag of the civil rights movement. The streamer's point is that it's all driven by a desire to feel good, not to do good. It's led by people who, frankly, are completely insulated from the consequences of the issues they're protesting. It's about that internal feeling of being righteous, not about external, tangible change. So, you might be wondering, why do these comparisons to the civil rights movement and Nazis pop up so often? According to the streamer, the explanation is, well, it's pretty cynical. They claim it's because that's basically the only history a lot of people learn in public school. The idea is that if your historical toolkit only has 2 hammers, everything starts to look like a nail. They're just reaching for the only analogies they know, even if they don't really fit.
Okay, so this whole critique of what they see as an uninformed public, it leads directly into the streamer's most radical, most controversial idea yet. They're not just criticizing anymore. Now they're proposing a solution. And it's a solution that takes a sledgehammer to what many of us consider the bedrock of modern democracy.
And to get to that controversial point, the streamer tees it up with this massive question. What's the single biggest problem in society? The implication is that everything we've talked about so far, the legal misunderstandings, the activism, they're all just symptoms of one single underlying problem. And there's the answer. The single biggest problem, according to them, The fact that everybody can vote. Yeah, the argument here is that universal suffrage, this thing we hold up as a core value, is actually society's greatest weakness. And their justification is just as blunt. You can't educate people that are stupid.
So if that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, it's filters. They propose putting some barriers in place before you can cast a ballot. Two main ideas get thrown out there. The first is some kind of voting test, to make sure people are informed. The second is what they call a net positive taxpayer test, basically to make sure voters are contributing members of society, in their view.
Now, how do you justify an idea that sounds so anti-democratic? Well, the streamer reaches back into history. They argue that our modern idea of everyone voting is actually the strange thing, the historical outlier. They point back to the Founding Fathers, reminding us that originally voting was restricted to white male landowners. So, from their perspective, adding these filters isn't some radical new idea. It's actually a return to the country's original principles.
And that leaves us right here, with this really fundamental question. By proposing these filters, the streamer is doing more than just floating a policy idea. They're really forcing us to ask, what even is a democracy? Is it about giving every single person a voice, no matter what? Or is there a point where, for the supposed good of society, you limit who gets to make the big decisions? That's the challenging question at the very heart of this entire worldview.